And a little bit of background about me. I've got stud beef cattle at Rathdowney, which is about an hour and a half south of Brisbane. And I became interested in feed efficiency while I was still at uni in 1993. And I had great ideas about how we could measure feed efficiency, but as a student I lacked the funds, the technology wasn't quite there at the time, and so it didn't all come together. So I worked on it in the mid to late 90s and then through into 2000. But in 2010, I approached a local feedlotter and together we put in for a Landcare grant and we received $10,000, and with that $10,000 we established a feed test station that you can see there with 3 feed bins, the blue bins on the left, and we've tested nearly 50 bulls in the last 2 years. So that's where my experience with feed efficiency comes from. One of them will work. There we go. So your first quiz question of the day is, which animal up there is most efficient? There's 14 bulls, left to right, pick a number. Biggest one? No, it's the one with the shortest leg. Which one's that? The one in the middle, you think? Stand at the camera? I'll say I took this photo halfway through the trial. I've just weighed the cattle, and at that stage I hadn't processed any data, so I didn't know when I was taking the photo which animal was the most efficient. I had 18 bulls in the trial and only 14 of them are in the photo, but I did get lucky. So, a history of feed efficiency, and I'll just read the definition because it's more than I want to remember. But residual feed intake is defined as the difference between actual feed intake and that predicted on the basis of requirements for production and maintenance of body weight. It was first proposed in 1963 by an American researcher called Koch, and it was based on work done with the Hereford, Angus and Shorthorn breeds. So it can be called RFI or NFE or NFI. There's a few different terminologies. They all mean roughly the same thing. So it's basically the difference between what you think an animal's going to eat and what it actually eats. So a negative number is good and a positive number is bad. And that statement I read, what it says is it provides a value for efficiency which is independent of growth rate and animal size, because feed efficiency can be linked to the body size of the animal or its growth rate. So what this does is try to take that out of the equation. And it differs from the raw feed conversion ratio, which is basically feed eaten divided by live weight gain. And feed conversion ratio is my preferred method of recording efficiency. So it's calculated, and don't get scared by that big formula on the screen. And it took me 12 months to figure it all out, and I'm pretty good at maths. But basically the formula is Y, which is dry matter intake, and we record that, equals B0 or beta 0 plus beta 1 x1 plus beta 2 x2 plus epsilon. And of that formula, we record the dry matter intake with our feed efficiency setup. We record the mid-body weight. We can calculate that at the end of the trial based on the weekly cattle weights we do, and we know the average daily gain. And so it took me a little while to figure out that I could use Microsoft Excel to do all those calculations for me in a half a second, but it took 12 months to get it. But in the end, we come up with the final formula: actual intake equals expected, minus expected intake equals the residual. And this is the same results but in a graph format. And so the diagonal line up the middle there is the plot of y equals x. And what that means is that an animal whose little blue dot appears on that line ate exactly what we thought he was going to eat. And so if I pick out an animal, and we'll try to get a pointer to work, that animal there, we expected his actual intake was about 10.5, but his predicted intake was a bit under 9. So he ate a whole lot more feed than what we thought he was going to eat based on his growth rate in the 70-day trial and his size. Whereas I'll take that animal there, we predicted he was going to eat a little bit less than 7, he actually ate less than 6. So he's eaten a kilo of feed per day less than what we thought he was going to do. So in terms of selecting for RFI, we would much prefer animals to be on this side of the line than to be on this side of the line. But what you can see is just there's a whole heap of animals whose predicted intake was all very similar, and yet they had quite differing actual intakes. and that's where there's potential to improve your herd. So now that you know a little bit more about feed efficiency, have you changed your mind? Because it's not easy. We can't tell just by looking at them which is the most efficient. So you'll know now that we actually have to measure it. So how we measure it is a 70 to 77 day trial after a 21-day pre-trial phase. We do that in an accredited feed test station, which ours is, and it needs to be in a registered feedlot. We have weekly cattle weights. We have daily cattle intakes, which we record and then calculate later with our software. And then there's some other guidelines there that you can read. So our scales hold 400 kilos of feed, and they record at a 20 gram accuracy. And so we account for all feed. So there's no unaccounted for losses in our system. All feed eaten is allocated to one animal or another, rightly or wrongly. And this is the computer we use as a data logger. So as you can see, it's set in an old fridge freezer that used to be Warren's icebox. We've got the monitor up top of the computer down the bottom, and the 6 windows at the top of the screen, just up there. 3 of them are recording from the ear tag reader, and 3 of them are recording from the cattle scales. So we just log that data to file. I download it every 2 or 3 days and process it roughly once a week. And this is a sample copy of the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. And I haven't shown all of the data there, but these are our RFID numbers from the electronic tags. This is the dates. This is the trial last year in September. This is the end time when they finished their feed. And right across here is their consumption. So you can see there's some big consumptions, 0.94. There's some at 0. So they've shoved their head in the feeder and an animal's barreled them up the rear end and they've pulled their head straight back out again because they didn't want to eat. But we're recording all of the consumptions. So what have we found? We've tested more than 50 bulls of multiple breeds, and the breeds we've tested are Blonde, Braford, Sander, Charolais, Brahman, Charbray and Charolais Angus. So it's a range of breeds, and we've found that there's about a 50% variation both between breeds and herds and within breeds and herds. So for my cattle in particular, my best reading so far is 3.34 to 1, my worst is about 5.5, and that's about a 50% variation. And that's just in my herd. That same variation exists between my herd and other people's herds. So what that means is there's a great opportunity, if you can measure it, to use feed efficiency as a selection tool and improve it. So this graph here is showing a plot of feed conversion ratio against average daily gain. And I like this graph because it's quite representative of what we're trying to do in selecting cattle. So up here in this top quadrant there, top left, if I can find the button, we have cattle that are above average, or I call it above average for feed conversion ratio, so it's really good, and they're also above average for average daily gain. And for me, that's my preferred quadrant. They grow fast and they eat bugger all. And the complete opposite would be down here in this quadrant for animals that eat a lot and don't gain a whole lot of weight. And if we use society as an example, if we talk about a woman who eats chocolate, there's some women can eat chocolate and they don't put on a skerrick of weight. And then there's other women who only have to look at it and they just pile on the kilos without touching it. So what we have here are people or cattle that look at it and, they look at it and don't put on the weight. And these ones up here are the ones that look at it and don't put on the weight. These ones down here are eating heaps of it and not doing very well. So in terms of my selection, that particular bull there was one of mine in our first trial, and I've used him as a stud sire this year. And so we're actually testing his progeny in the feed test station right now. They're in their pre-trial phase. There's 8 calves by him and that bull there and that bull there. They're 3 ET brothers. And so what we're trying to do is establish some heritability for our results from the first 2 trials to see whether it's passing into the progeny and what improvements we're making in our selection. So why is it important to beef cattle production? Feed conversion ratio is a direct measure of feed costs. And in a feedlot situation, feed cost is the number 2 driver of profitability. The number one cost is your buy-sell price. So if you're paying too much or selling them too cheap, you're not going to make money. So feed's something that you can, feed conversion ratio is something you can select for and improve. It's also highly heritable, around 40%, and it ranges from mid to highly heritable at that rate, but that's pretty good heritability. There aren't too many cattle traits in beef cattle production that can be passed on from parents to to progeny at that sort of heritability. And the best thing is that testing in a feed test station under grain feeding situation correlates really well with grass conversion at home in the paddock. So what you end up with are cows that perform really well in grass pastures. If drought's coming on and feed starts to decline, you'll have cows that are able to keep body condition that little bit longer, which means that if you have to sell, yours might be in a little bit better condition than your neighbours, so you'll get more money for them. It also means that as feed comes on at the end of the drought, when it's starting to rain again, those cattle have excellent conversion, so they'll be able to put on weight faster, and you'll be able to turn them off sooner and reduce your stock numbers if you've had to carry them. So this is that same plot before, and it's showing here the linkages between the linkages of heritability. And you can see up here, there's 3 animals here, all related to 1 cow. And basically we've got number 1 and maybe number 4 and 6 in terms of feed conversion ratio. And 2 of those animals are her sons in the one trial, and 1 was from the year before, and that was her nephew. And without testing, I would never have known that all of that related back to 1 cow. And I mentioned the 3 ET brothers before, and this fella here actually got sick, which explains his lower daily gain. He was sick for about 2 weeks early in the trial. But they all have very similar feed conversion ratios and quite similar average daily gains. Yet they're not really a similar style of bull. There's probably 2 or 3 different styles of bulls between those 3 bulls. They're not peas in a pod, as we'd call it in the industry. So I think this is your last guess at the slide. Which animal is the most efficient? Yell out a number. Which one is it? Number 1. If I'd have known it was him, I wouldn't have chopped his head off the photo. But anyway, he turned out to be the most efficient with a feed conversion ratio of 3.34 to 1 and an average daily gain of 2 kilos a day, which I think was pretty good. They were quite young cattle going on to feed. They ranged in weight from about 150 up to 200 kilos. And so this is towards the end of the trial. That might have been 2 or 3 weeks ago. But in terms of breeds, he's a purebred blonde. That one there is a blonde cross red poll. That one there is a blonde cross Murray grey, as is that one there. That there is a blondman. That's a full brother to a half brother to that one. So he's one of the ones that was in the top 6. So that's what we've found in the trial. But the take-home message from that is you can't tell which of those 14 are the most efficient. What you can't tell is which is the least efficient. Does anyone want to have a guess at that? Because he's in the photo too. Whoops. No, it wasn't the middle one. It was that blondman bull there. He was the least efficient. And at 5.57 to 1 of a conversion, and I call him the least efficient, that's by no means disrespectful. The grain price at the moment is $300 a tonne or 30 cents a kilo, so at a conversion of 6 to 1 is going to cost you $1.80 per kilo of live weight gain to feed your cattle, and you'll sell them through the sale yards as steers at maybe $2.10. So there's still a margin in terms of my cattle, that most inefficient one. And when I was speaking about those averages before, those averages are animals that we've tested. That's not the average of all cattle. The average of all cattle is around 6 to 7 to 1. So there are some inefficient cattle out there. We've found a couple of them, but the ability to test can weed out those inefficient ones. Which leads me to climate and why feed efficiency is important to climate. And it's important because there's a correlation between efficiency and methane production, because animals that are efficient use more of the energy for their own daily gain and their maintenance than what they do expelling it as heat or burping it. And that's where most methane comes from, is from burping, because cattle regurgitate their food and the gases come with it when they regurgitate into their mouth. Another thing that makes it important is high grain prices, and certainly the ethanol mandate that's been in Australia and is happening in America, and we're seeing more corn diverted into ethanol production than for feedlotting, drives up the cost of grain because there's another use that's mandated by law. And as that price goes up, it makes feedlotting more expensive, and it makes it harder for feedlotters to make money. So there's pressure on feedlotters to select for feed-efficient cattle to try to maintain their margins. But by selecting for feed-efficient cattle, they're also having a climate benefit as well. There are consumer expectations that farmers will fix their burping cows, because at the moment we all know that Australia's excluded from the carbon, agriculture's excluded from the carbon tax in Australia, but that may not be the case forever. And when you think that it's going to take maybe 3 years, if you make a selection decision now to go out and buy a bull, for him to breed daughters, for those daughters to come up to 2 or 3 years of age, and for them to get into calf, to get to breeding age, you're looking at a 3 or sometimes 4 year generational gap to make improvements. So you've got some serious considerations that if agriculture was included in a carbon tax tomorrow, you've got problems if you've got to try to reduce your methane output. So we're nearing the end, and I've picked these animals from our last trial. They're all my cattle and they're all little blonde bulls. So in this particular slide, comparing this bull to this one, they have the same average daily gain and similar feed conversion ratios. But if we look at their residual feed intake, one's a negative. He ate 270 grams less per day than what we thought he was going to eat. And the other bull, if the pointer will work and I'm pointing in the right direction, 8.11 kilos per day. So what that means is that one animal ate 270 grams less, one animal ate 110 grams more. So you think, well, that's great. We select for RFI. We're going to end up saving ourselves money in the long run by selecting for residual feed intake because he's eaten less than expected. But if we actually look at the consumptions of the animals, this animal here ate 6.61 kilos a day, and this animal ate 6.41 kilos a day, but their RFI scores are exactly the same. But if you were selecting animals with an EBV and you look at 0.11, he's a little bit below average, he's near zero, what can you do? Do you select the one that's got the low growth rate? Because you don't know what their feed conversion ratio is because that's not published. So that's a problem. We then compare this bull here to the final one on the screen. One's got an okay RFI score and one's minus 0.61. So he's eaten a whole lot of feed less than expected. But the problem is that he hasn't got the daily gain that this bull here has. So in terms of selecting him as your stud sire, by gaining a good RFI score, you're foregoing daily gain. And from my way of thinking, that's a problem. So it brings us on to the last slide. That's the bull that came first, F11. He's by a French AI bull that I brought into Australia. And I leave it up there because there are drawbacks to testing for feed efficiency. One of those drawbacks is it's expensive to measure. It can cost $250 to $500 for the grain, just the grain alone, plus the cost of doing the labour and testing it, and that's about $50 to $100 per head. The RFI figure only correlates 60% to the feed conversion ratio figure. The DNA test is less than 30% accurate. That cow I had a few slides back that has 3 of the top 50 animals that we've ever tested. Her DNA score puts her with only 20 worse animals out of 2,000 or 3,000 animals tested in Australia. So she's in the bottom 100% of animals. There's only 20 with raw scores worse than her, and yet she's breeding animals that are some of the most efficient that we've ever tested, and I think probably some of the most efficient in Australia, because these scores are really, really good. Another drawback is that my worst bull from the first trial actually ranks in the top 1% of cattle for feed efficiency, and yet in that trial there were 8 cattle better than him, but he was the highest ranking of all of them. And so there's still a little bit of work to be done to get the DNA test right. The problem is that there's no beef CRC anymore, there's not a lot of work getting done on feed efficiency, and so it's going to be up to individual producers to start measuring it and recording it. And I guess the other drawback, it's difficult to measure without specialised equipment. You can go home and measure for feed efficiency tomorrow, you manually weigh the feed every day into the trough with one animal in a pen, but that's a hell of a lot of work. And with this system, we can measure 35 animals at a time over a trial. Thank you.